My name is Stella, and I want to share the roller coaster journey my life has taken. It all started in an environment of affluence, being the cherished only child of my wealthy parents. My father, Matteo, was a successful businessman, while my mother, Haley, was a renowned socialite known for hosting the city's most splendid gatherings. They ensured I lacked for nothing, enveloping me in love and care. As I ventured into college, my sole focus was to make my parents proud. I dedicated myself entirely to my studies. That's when Jason came into my life. His persistence was undeniable. He would wait for me after classes, bring me coffee during my late-night study sessions, and unexpectedly turn up at our house one day. In our living room, he boldly told my parents, "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I am deeply in love with your daughter and want you to know I have serious intentions." My father saw in Jason the son he never had and was quickly impressed, even suggesting I consider dating him because he seemed like a promising match. Reluctantly, I agreed. To my surprise, Jason's charm and attentiveness won me over. Our relationship flourished, and soon after graduation, we married. My parents, especially my father, were thrilled, seeing Jason as the son he'd always desired. At our wedding reception, my father enthusiastically welcomed Jason into our family and promptly helped him start his own business, a modern car wash facility, and also assisted us in buying our first cozy home. A year into our marriage, we welcomed our son Wyatt. Holding him for the first time ignited in me an unparalleled depth of love. I embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, dedicating myself to full-time parenting duties that revolved around Wyatt's needs. Life settled into a predictable rhythm as Wyatt grew from a bubbly toddler to a spirited child, and eventually into a contemplative teenager. Meanwhile, Jason struggled with the car wash business, feeling diminished under my father's shadow. He frequently lashed out, feeling belittled by what he perceived as handouts. Despite my efforts to comfort him, our home life became tense, filled with arguments that left me treading lightly to avoid conflict. Wyatt, sensing the strain, retreated into himself, spending more time alone or with friends. As years passed, the physical toll of stress and motherhood reshaped me. I was no longer the trim college student Jason had pursued. He pointed out my changed appearance disparagingly, suggesting I had let myself go. Despite the hurt these words caused, I told myself he was simply stressed and didn't mean them. Yet, as I navigated these challenges, I realized the importance of finding strength within and cherishing my worth, regardless of the storms life brought. As I navigated the tempestuous waters of my life, it became painfully clear that the foundations of my marriage to Jason were crumbling. Then, one sunny Tuesday that seemed like any other, I received a devastating phone call. A somber voice informed me, "Mrs. Thompson, I regret to inform you that your parents have been involved in a small plane crash in Florida. I'm sorry, but they didn't survive." The following weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements and settling estates, a process made even more challenging by Jason's startling absence. When Jason was present, his demeanor was unsettlingly upbeat. Just a week after the funeral, he began pressing me about the inheritance. "Have you talked to the lawyer yet? We need to sort this out," he urged, his tone shockingly indifferent to my grief. I was taken aback by his insensitivity. "Jason, can't this wait?" "I'm still grieving," I said, to which he replied bluntly, "Business doesn't wait, Stella. We need to know where we stand financially." With a heavy heart, I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Hudson, our family lawyer. In Mr. Hudson's elegantly appointed office, the atmosphere was tense. He began, "Mrs. Thompson, your parents' will is quite unique. It's split into two parts, and I can only disclose the first part now. The second will be revealed in exactly 1 year." Jason leaned in eagerly as Mr. Hudson continued, "The mansion is left to your future grandchildren, with their guardians acting as trustees until they come of age." I was dumbfounded. Wyatt, our only son, wasn't even married. Wyatt, who had insisted on attending, reacted with a surprising, "Well, that opens up some interesting possibilities." His casual remark puzzled me, but before I could question him, Jason interjected angrily, "That's it? What about the rest? The businesses, the money? Mr. Hudson firmly replied, the rest will be revealed next year. As we left the office, the dynamics between us had palpably shifted. Jason was unusually silent, and Wyatt appeared contemplative. Not long after the will's initial reading, Wyatt made a startling announcement at dinner. Mom, Dad, there's someone I want you to meet. The following day, he introduced us to Maeve, a pretty young woman with a guarded smile. This is my wife, and she's pregnant with our child, he declared.
I was stunned, wife.
Pregnant? How had this all happened so quickly? Wyatt explained they had married hastily upon learning of the pregnancy. I glanced at Jason, who seemed oddly pleased, nodding in approval. Something felt unsettling about the situation, but I shelved my doubts, focusing instead on the fact that I was about to become a grandmother. Congratulations, I managed to say, mustering enthusiasm. This is quite a surprise. Maeve's smile widened. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I'm so excited to be part of your family. Maeve moved in soon after, citing the need for family support during her pregnancy. Initially, I was thrilled to have another woman in the house, but as time passed, the household dynamics shifted dramatically. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this sudden marriage than met the eye, yet amidst the chaos and secrets, I found a new role awaiting me, one that promised a different kind of love and connection. It soon became clear that Maeve had her plans, which involved undermining me subtly. Whenever I cooked, she'd grimace and make comments suggesting I was doing it wrong. Her interactions with Jason were even more alarming. She would laugh at his jokes, touch his arm, and shower him with compliments, praising his business acumen. Jason, predictably, enjoyed the attention and started spending more time at home, but not with me. He would discuss business with Maeve for hours while I felt pushed aside. I tried discussing Maeve's behavior with Wyatt, but he dismissed my concerns, suggesting I was just jealous because I wasn't the center of attention anymore. His words stung deeply, and it pained me to think that my son was so dismissive of my feelings. Jason, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in this new family dynamic, clearly enjoying Maeve's praise and looking at me with something that felt like contempt. One day, while grocery shopping, I bumped into Ruby, an old college friend. We caught up over coffee, and during our conversation, she brought up a memory that chilled me. She reminisced about a guy from our college days who pursued wealthy girls, a guy named Jason. My heart raced as she described him as the kind of person who ended up marrying a naive rich girl. The more she described, the more I realized she was talking about my Jason. My stomach turned as I drove home, realizing that our marriage might have been a sham. At home, I found Jason in his study. I confronted him about what I had learned. At first, he tried to dismiss it, but his brief look of fear gave him away. When I pressed him, he admitted, laughing, that he had indeed married me for my family's wealth and that he never loved me. His words were a devastating blow. He called me a burden, confessing without remorse that he stayed with me only for financial gain. This revelation left me reeling, facing the grim reality of our relationship and the need to confront what my life had become. It suddenly all made sense when Jason, with chilling clarity, revealed his true intentions. He no longer needed me because my parents had passed away and their wealth would soon be within his reach, ostensibly for our grandson, but really for his control. The pieces fell into place. Wyatt's rushed wedding, Maeve's timely pregnancy, and their demeaning treatment towards me. It was all a calculated scheme to inherit my family's wealth. You planned all this? I managed to ask, disbelief choking my voice. Jason's laugh was harsh, echoing off the walls. Give credit where it's due. It was mostly Wyatt's idea. The boy has a good head for business, he boasted, a stark contrast to the way he dismissed my acumen. I felt like I was suffocating under the heavy realization of their betrayal. Does Maeve know? I asked, already dreading the answer. Of course she does, Jason smirked. She's a smart girl and knows a good opportunity when she sees one. She'll make a proper wife for a businessman. I couldn't bear it any longer and fled the room, my world shattered. Reality hit me hard. I had nowhere to go and no money of my own, not even enough to rent a small apartment. With a heavy heart, I resigned myself to staying in a house filled with people I no longer trusted. 3 months later, Jason unceremoniously announced another shock. "Pack your bags, Stella," he declared as he entered the kitchen. "We're moving into your parents' house." The news nearly made me drop the knife I was holding. "When did we decide this?" I asked, though his mocking laugh told me I had no part in this decision. "We didn't. I decided. We're moving in with Wyatt and Maeve. After all, our grandson is the heir to that house." Each word felt like a slap in my face. "What about our house?" "Oh, that," Jason dismissed. "I sold it. The money's already spent on things for people I care about. And you're not on that list." Over the next few days, I watched in silent agony as Jason, Wyatt, and Maeve excitedly prepared for the move. They indulged in new cars, expensive clothes, and gadgets while I was ignored and forgotten. Moving to my parents' house felt like a cruel joke. Maeve claimed the master bedroom immediately, relegating me to a small guest room at the back of the house. As days turned into weeks, my isolation deepened. Maeve had her baby and turned the house into her kingdom, with me as her reluctant servant. "Stella, the baby needs changing," she would call out, "and could you tidy up the living room? It's a bit messy." Despite the pain, I found a small comfort in caring for my grandson, his innocent smile a bittersweet solace. But one evening, about a month after the move, I reached my breaking point. At dinner, which I had prepared, Maeve was particularly demanding. "Stella, fetch me some more water and hurry up with clearing these plates," she ordered. Something inside me snapped. All the years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. "Enough," I shouted, slamming my hands on the table. "I am not your maid, Maeve. This is my parents' house, and I deserve some respect." The room fell into stunned silence as Maeve's face crumpled, unable to respond to the sudden assertion of my dignity. And so, Maeve erupted into melodramatic tears, accusing me of harshness after everything they had supposedly done for me. Jason, his face flushed with anger, declared he'd had enough of my supposed ingratitude. "Pack your things and leave. This house belongs to our grandson now, and you're no longer welcome here," he announced. I was in shock, scarcely believing his words. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. Jason nonchalantly pulled out a stack of papers from his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you these," he said, handing me divorce papers that were already signed. "I want you gone by morning." I turned to Wyatt, desperate for some sign of support, but he merely shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I'm an adult now, Mom. I don't need you anymore." With trembling hands, I accepted the papers. As I walked out of the dining room, Maeve's smirk was the last thing I saw. My world was in pieces, and I felt utterly alone. With no place to go and my heart heavy, I dialed a familiar number. Ruby, my old college friend, answered promptly. Hearing the concern in her voice when I said I needed a place to stay, she immediately offered her guest room. While settling in, Ruby shared her burdens. Her son was struggling after his fiancée, who was pregnant, had left him. Curious, I asked if she had a picture of her. As she showed me the photo, my heart froze. Staring back at me was Maeve, the very woman causing my despair. "Ruby," I began slowly, "I think I know where your son's fiancée is." Over cups of tea, I shared my entire ordeal. Ruby's face shifted from shock to anger, and then to determination. "We need to expose them," she asserted. Together, we devised a plan. The next day, I returned to my parents' house under the pretext of collecting my belongings. While there, I managed to obtain a few strands of my grandson's hair for a DNA test. The wait for the results was excruciating, but they confirmed our suspicions. Ruby's son was the father of Maeve's baby, not Wyatt. As I was pondering how to reveal this to Wyatt and Jason, I received a call from Mr. Hudson, my parents' lawyer. He asked me to review the second part of my parents' will. In his office the next day, I listened, heart pounding, as he unveiled the contents. "To our beloved daughter, Stella," he read, "we leave our luxury apartment valued at $610,000. But there was more. In the event of a divorce, all their property, including the business Jason was involved in, would revert to me. It turned out my father had been the silent financier of Jason's business, and he had cleverly registered everything in his name. As Mr. Hudson explained, I was overwhelmed with emotion. All this time, I had thought I had nothing, but in reality, I had everything. When I inquired about the house Jason had sold, Mr. Hudson reassured me, that's the only thing Jason can claim. Everything else is yours. As the reality of my newfound situation sank in, I couldn't help but laugh. Jason had thought he was being clever, but in the end, his plans had unraveled spectacularly. But ultimately, Jason had only outsmarted himself. When I first stepped into my new apartment, I was taken aback by its beauty. The place was a panorama of sleek lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and elegant furnishings that radiated modern sophistication. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace in what felt like a sanctuary. As I was admiring my new home, my phone rang. It was Wyatt. "Mom," he began urgently, "it's been a year since we read the first part of the will. We need to know what's in the second part." His tone was demanding, entitled even. "I'm sure Grandma and Grandpa left everything to me, right?" His assumption made me inwardly smirk. "Wyatt, this isn't a conversation for the phone. Why don't you, Maeve, and your father come over tomorrow? I'll text you the address," I said calmly, then hung up. Immediately after, I called Ruby. "It's time," I told her. "Can you come over tomorrow morning? We're going to settle this once and for all." The next day, I heard the doorbell ring and took a deep breath before opening the door. Jason, Wyatt, Maeve, and the baby stood there, mouths agape as they took in the opulence of my apartment. Wyatt whistled in admiration. "Wow, Mom, this place is amazing. I can't wait to move in." Maeve's eyes sparkled with avarice as she remarked, "Yes, it'll be so nice once we change all this old lady decor. And, of course, once we get rid of you, Stella." I raised an eyebrow at her audacity. "I wouldn't be so hasty if I were you," I replied, inviting them to sit on the plush sofa. I excused myself briefly, and when I returned, Ruby was with me, her presence causing Maeve to visibly pale. "Before we discuss the will," I began, my voice steady, "there's someone I'd like you all to meet. This is my friend, Ruby." Maeve's eyes darted around, seeking an escape, while Wyatt and Jason looked merely confused. "Now," I continued, "I think it's time we had a frank discussion. There are some truths that need to be revealed." I savored the moment, having rehearsed my words all night. The revelations I was about to unveil would change everything. As I faced those who had betrayed me, my ex-husband, my son, and the woman who had almost usurped my place, I felt a surge of righteous indignation. Ruby stepped closer, and Jason recognized her, his face twisting into a bitter smirk. Well, he sneered, "looks like I achieved my goal after all. Married a rich fool, didn't I?" His words stung, but I remained composed. "We'll address your betrayal later, Jason. Right now, there's something more pressing." I turned to Maeve, who squirmed under the scrutiny. "We know the truth about you, Maeve." "Wyatt," I said, turning to my son whose face was a mask of confusion. "When Maeve heard about the will from you, she saw an opportunity. She decided to pass off someone else's child as your own to secure your grandparents' estate." Ruby's voice was steady as she delivered the final blow. "The baby isn't Wyatt's, it's my son's child." The room fell deathly silent. I then presented the DNA test results. As the truth sank in, Maeve's face lost all color. In a sudden flurry, she grabbed her bag. "I don't need this. I don't need a beggar's child," she declared, storming out of the apartment. Wyatt stood shell-shocked, the baby still in his arms, looking utterly lost. Jason, recovering from his initial shock, asked in a small voice, "So, who gets this apartment?" I smiled, ready to enlighten him. "Well, Jason, let me tell you about the second part of my parents' will," I explained. As I detailed the specifics of the inheritance, the apartment, the car, all of it, Jason's face fell further with each revelation. Suddenly, he was on his knees. "Stella, please, I'm sorry. Forgive me." His plea barely registered as I considered all that had transpired, the weight of their deceit still lingering, but now tempered by the justice of their unraveling plans. I could feel the tension in the air as I looked at him, my voice cold and unwavering. "Get out, Jason. You have 2 days to leave my parents' house, or I'll call the police." Jason scrambled to his feet, a look of desperation flashing across his face. He turned to Wyatt and said, "Son, give me the car I bought you. I need something." Wyatt's response was quick and firm. "No, it's mine. You're not getting anything from me." With one last look of frustration, Jason slunk out of the apartment, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I turned to Wyatt, who stood there, his head lowered in shame. Ruby, standing beside us, gently took the baby from his arms. I spoke to Wyatt with a tone that was firm, yet not unkind. "Since it turns out I don't have any grandchildren, and there are no other heirs to your grandparents' house besides me, I need you to move out as well." Wyatt didn't meet my eyes as he nodded. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I'll go pack my things." Without another word, he too left the apartment. As the door closed behind him, a heavy silence filled the room. The only sound now was the soft cooing of the baby in Ruby's arms. I looked at my old friend, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of freedom. "Well," I said, managing a small smile, "that didn't go exactly as I expected when I woke up this morning." Ruby nodded, gently bouncing the baby in her arms. "You did what you had to do, Stella. They left you no choice." I sank onto the plush sofa, my mind racing as I realized something important. For the first time in years, I was truly free. Free from lies, free from manipulation, and free to live my life on my terms. The months that followed that fateful confrontation were a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. I found myself settling into my luxurious apartment, a place that became my sanctuary, a peaceful retreat where I could finally start anew. One of my first decisions was to rent out my parents' house. It felt right to have a young family move in, people who would appreciate the warmth and history of the house. The rental income provided a comfortable cushion, along with the money I earned from selling Jason's car wash business. My friendship with Ruby deepened as well. We spent time together over coffee, sharing stories and offering support through the ups and downs of our new lives. And then there was little Jason, Ruby's grandson, the child I had once believed to be my own. Despite the painful circumstances surrounding his birth, I found myself growing deeply attached to him. "He has your eyes," Ruby would joke during our visits, and we'd laugh, finding humor in the bizarre and tangled paths our lives had taken. As for Wyatt, our relationship was a slow and cautious rebuilding. The betrayal had hurt me deeply, but he was still my son, and I couldn't completely sever that bond. Our interactions were awkward at first, tentative phone calls and uncomfortable meetings in neutral coffee shops. But little by little, painfully, we began to heal and rebuild the relationship we had lost. Jason, on the other hand, became a shadow of my past. I heard through the grapevine that his once grandiose dreams of wealth and status had crumbled, all because of his exposed lies. I saw him only once, by chance, as I drove through town. He was working at a small kiosk, looking older and more worn than I remembered. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I felt a flicker of something, no love, no longing, just a sense of closure. The light changed, and I drove on, leaving that chapter of my life firmly in the rearview mirror. And so, life moved on. With each passing day, I felt more at peace, finally free from the chaos of the past, embracing the new life I had worked so hard to create.
My name is Juliana. I have a 7 years older brother named Spencer. Ever since he was a child, he excelled academically. His performance was top-notch from an early age, and he graduated from a prestigious high school and university. Naturally, our parents were very proud of him and often spoke about how amazing he was. Perhaps due to this environment, his personality became warped as he grew up. Always being expected to excel and constantly praised may have caused him to overestimate himself. Upon graduating from university and finding a new job, he decided to leave our family home. When he left, he sarcastically remarked, "I can't bear such a mundane life in this house anymore," with a wry smile. I'll never forget the look on our parents' faces at that moment. They couldn't hide their surprise, and there was a hint of sadness. In the past, Spencer was always cheerful and cherished us. Honestly, I was angry then. I never stood out like my brother in studies or sports, and the high school I attended wasn't super prestigious, but I valued the bond and love of our family. Both my brother and I owe our lives to our parents' support. I wished he felt that too. During my high school years, I realized daily how precious the warmth and love of a family are. Strangely, my brother didn't seem to feel that love. Our parents had watched over us, pouring endless love onto us, but my brother seemed to see them as ordinary people. That weighed on my heart. As a child, my brother was like a hero to me. Seeing him handle everything perfectly made me want to be like him. He used to care about me, play with me, and help me study. However, he changed. By the time I was about to graduate from high school, he began to say things like, "Do you really need higher education?" and "You're wasting your time on such things." Whenever our parents confronted him about his attitude, he retorted, "I became this way because of you." I cried then, but my parents hugged me and said, "Juliana, you've grown into a truly kind-hearted person." Encouraged by their kindness, I managed to get into a national university and secured a job at my dream company. Since my mother had given birth to me relatively late in life, by the time I started working, my parents were almost 60. By then, my brother was already married, but oddly enough, neither my parents nor I had met his wife. My parents had brought up the idea of inviting him home several times, but he always hesitated, saying, "It's a bit of a consideration to introduce her to our family," and avoided bringing his wife to our house. About half a year had passed since I started my life as a new member of the workforce. Just when I thought I was gradually getting accustomed to my job, an unexpected event occurred. During work hours, when I usually wouldn't receive personal calls, my cell phone displayed an incoming call from my mother. Normally my mother knows I'm at work, so she wouldn't call. I stepped outside and discreetly answered the phone. My mother's voice was softer than usual. "Hey, are you okay? Are you busy right now?" she asked. "No, I'm okay. What happened?" I replied, my heart beginning to race. "The thing is, your father suddenly fell," she said. I felt a weight on my chest at those words. I immediately informed my supervisor about the situation, ran to the station to catch a taxi, and hurried to the hospital my mother had told me about. Along the way, I repeatedly hoped and prayed in my mind, wondering how my father was, and hoping that he was all right. When I entered the waiting room, my mother, tears streaming down her face, greeted me. "What happened, Mom?" I sat next to her, filled with worry. How did my father, who was fine in the morning, suddenly end up in this condition? Unable to process that question, words poured out of my mouth one after another. After a pause, she quietly said, "Your father has been diagnosed with cancer." Hearing this, I felt as if time had stopped. "Why?" I asked, my surprise and anxiety spilling out in my voice. My mother took a deep breath and began to speak with sadness. "It's stage 4. The cancer has spread to the bile duct, and they said it's hard to remove it all." After that, my mother couldn't stop her tears, and I choked on my words multiple times as I listened. "So what treatment will be done next?" I asked, seeking some glimmer of hope. She nodded somberly after a short pause. After a while, the attending physician came and explained the detailed condition and the treatment. My father's illness had progressed more than expected, and metastasis to other parts had been confirmed. Therefore, even if they operated, there was a significant risk, and they couldn't guarantee success. My mother and I held hands, trying to come to terms with this reality. The doctor's words were matter of fact, making us acutely aware of the harsh reality we faced. Specifically, you can either continue with chemotherapy or choose support in a palliative care ward. Both are crucial choices, so we'd like the family to discuss and decide together, the doctor said, his voice calm but firm. As I slowly sat down on the sofa in the corner of the waiting room, a silence spread between us. Only the ticking of the clock's second hand seemed to carve through the heavy atmosphere. Seeing tears quietly stream down my mother's face, I pondered how to approach the situation. It was a challenging time to communicate, but necessary procedures had to be followed to move forward. We should include Spencer in this conversation. Let's contact him immediately and discuss making a decision together, I suggested, and picked up my smartphone. With a wry smile, my mother confided, "Actually, I've already informed Spencer, but he hasn't responded." At that moment, recalling past events and my brother's nature, I had a certain premonition. When he sought help, he'd get extremely upset if he didn't respond quickly. Yet he tended to run away from situations requiring tough decisions. However, believing that the opinions of the entire family were essential this time, I kept calling him. After more than 10 attempts, I finally heard my brother's slightly irritated voice. "What do you want calling me over and over?" he snapped. "Brother, do you fully understand Dad's condition? Mom should have informed you in detail. Why haven't you come to the hospital?" I asked, my voice imbued with both urgency and anxiety. After a brief pause, he sighed, sounding annoyed. "Of course, I know. But unlike you, I'm swamped with work. Dad's still alive, isn't he? I don't think there's any need to be overly concerned." His words lacked any shred of understanding or empathy, deeply shaking me. "This isn't a joke. We don't know what could happen to Dad at any moment. Have you forgotten how much he's worked for our family? We are here today because of his support," I protested, feeling tears threatening to spill. Without showing any emotion, my brother curtly said, "Now is not the time to be fussing over this. There's no point in discussing further. I'm hanging up." He promptly ended the call. Stunned by the exchange, I was at a loss. I couldn't hide my astonishment at my brother's indifference. I knew he lacked a sense of family bond and gratitude, but I never thought he'd grown into such a detached person. When I returned to my mother, a look of concern was evident on her face. "What happened?" she inquired. "It seems he is quite busy now," I replied, avoiding the details. My mother sighed deeply, murmuring, "It would have been comforting if Spencer was here." My father chose to spend his final moments in a palliative care ward, and a few months after that decision, he quietly passed away. I informed my brother of this somber news over the phone and conveyed the details of the wake and funeral. However, his response was cold. "I'm busy with work, so I can't attend. Please proceed without me," he stated. True to his word, he didn't appear at our father's wake or funeral. It seemed even my mother was shocked by this fact. She probably never imagined her son wouldn't show up for his father's funeral. Both family and acquaintances expressed their surprise and disappointment at his absence. After the funeral, when a moment of quiet settled amongst the family, my mother exhaled deeply, muttering to herself, "He really didn't come." I took her hand and said firmly, "Mom, let's not worry about him anymore. We have to let him walk his path. For now, let's cherish our memories of Dad." My mother tightly squeezed my hand in response and smiled, replying, "Thank you." Unbelievably, the next day, my older brother suddenly appeared at the apartment where we live. When I opened the door, his expression was different from usual, filled with an urgent restlessness. Stepping inside, he demanded, without any greeting, "Where is the inheritance father left behind?" Shocked by his demand, I emotionally retorted, "Seriously? Someone who didn't even show up at the funeral, and now you're saying this?" Visibly irritated, my brother snapped, "Kids should stay quiet." The atmosphere became instantly tense, but my mother stepped forward, trying to calm the situation. "Apart from this apartment, your father didn't leave much behind," she explained. "There's no way that's true," my brother retorted, barely concealing his anger. Remaining calm, my mother placed my father's passbook on the table for my brother to see. Flipping through it, it became clear that all the savings our father had were transferred to a different account. "What is this all about?" my brother exclaimed in surprise. Mother replied gently, "Your father had instructed to move all the money to my account earlier. Also, this apartment's name has been changed, and now it's in my name." My brother, taken aback, was at a loss for words. He merely clicked his tongue in frustration and left. As we watched his departing figure, we were once again filled with admiration and gratitude for our father's foresight and his plan to protect the family. A few months later, my mother suddenly fell and was immediately taken to the hospital. It was completely unexpected, and the family was filled with shock and concern. The diagnosis revealed that she had pneumonia, and it was in a more advanced stage than we thought. I remembered her coughing slightly recently, when she had seen a doctor at a small clinic before, where she had been diagnosed with a minor cold. We felt relieved at that diagnosis and didn't worry further. However, detailed examinations at a major hospital revealed her condition was much more severe than we thought, and she had only about 3 months to live. Hearing this, I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe it, especially when she seemed so healthy. As expected, or perhaps tragically, just a few days after the 3-month mark, my mother quietly passed away. The space without her was filled with an indescribable stillness and sorrow. Why didn't I notice sooner? Why didn't I take her to a bigger hospital immediately? I questioned myself, filled with guilt and grief as I shed tears countless times. Even after hearing about my mother's passing, there was no sign of my brother coming to our house. My Aunt Callie, my mother's sister, and I were in charge of organizing the memorial service and the funeral. Understandably, it was a significant shock for my aunt that my brother didn't appear at our mother's last rites, just as he hadn't for our father's. My aunt was extremely outraged, but I felt that expecting anything or saying anything to my brother was meaningless after recalling his past actions. A few days after the funeral, as my aunt and I were sorting out the heirlooms, my brother appeared again, accompanied by his wife, whom we were meeting for the first time. "Where's Mom's inheritance? She must have left something, right?" From the get-go, that's what my brother brought up. I was both shocked and dumbfounded. My aunt, equally stunned, stared at him in disbelief. And the most astonishing thing was that beside my brother stood his wife, my new sister-in-law, who neither met our eyes nor greeted us. She just stood silently next to my brother. Even more shocking was that my brother did not even visit our mother's grave. "Brother, please at least pay your respects to our parents. At the very least, visit Mom's grave," I calmly asked him. With a sneering laugh, my brother responded, "Does that even mean anything?" He then quickly followed with, "By the way, how much of Mom's inheritance is left?" At that moment, Kaylee's expression changed drastically. In a voice filled with anger, contrasting with her usual warmth, she sternly admonished, "Spencer, how can you think of such things at a time like this? Juliana is managing the funeral on behalf of both of you, putting in all her effort. Shouldn't you act with a bit of gratitude thinking of your parents?" However, my brother completely ignored our aunt's anger, responding dismissively, "Auntie, it's none of your business. Don't interfere." Suddenly, with the demands made by my brother and sister-in-law, the atmosphere in the room became cold and tense. From behind my brother, my smiling sister-in-law said, "Of course, I remember your name, Juliana. Do you plan to keep all of your mother's inheritance for yourself?" "Sorry, but we can't allow that. This apartment is so lovely. I think it's perfect for us." I never imagined that my brother and his wife would say such things. "Why should I have to leave for the sake of both of you?" I asked, my voice quivering while twirling my finger. My sister-in-law continued, "This apartment has just been renovated, and its location is amazing. It's close to the station, and there are plenty of shops, so we'll be living here." I was at the peak of my anger. "Big brother, all you care about is the inheritance. What are you thinking?" I couldn't hold back and raised my voice. Turning away, my brother let out a heavy sigh. "Such vulgar behavior. Do you think raising your voice solves everything? We'll be back here in 3 days. Have everything ready to move out by then." With those words, their intentions became crystal clear. A mix of my anger and sadness bubbled up, and I couldn't stop my tears from flowing. But this wasn't just a one-time event. I had to think about what to do next. Determined, I wiped my tears. My aunt gently tapped my shoulder and handed me a letter. The delicate handwriting of my mother adorned the envelope's surface. "What's this, Auntie?" I asked, carefully opening the envelope. "Your mother entrusted this to me for a just-in-case scenario. She told me to give it to you at the right moment," my aunt said, tears forming in her eyes. I unfolded the paper and sighed. My mother's beautiful handwriting filled the page. "My dear Juliana, if you are reading this letter, it means I'm no longer in this world. I'm truly sorry for our sudden parting." I felt warmth in the back of my eyes, tears beginning to flow. "You might have Spencer visit the house concerning the inheritance, but don't worry. Everything that your father handed down to me is now yours." I was at a loss for words. I had no idea my mother had thought this far ahead and prepared everything in advance. "I'm sorry for suddenly leaving you alone, but I'm at peace because I've seen how much you've grown into a wonderful person. While learning is essential, it's not everything. The kindness and compassion you learn through your interactions with people is what I believe holds the most value. Your father and I were genuinely happy to see you grow up with such a warm heart until our last days, and words can't express just how proud we are of you. I truly want to express my heartfelt gratitude. Thank you." I was stunned. "Mom," I whispered, deeply moved. The words before me blurred with my tears, but I was determined to take in every sentiment my mother had conveyed, and continued reading. "Actually, after your father passed away, following his wishes, I secretly changed the apartment's ownership to your name. I'm sorry for using your seal without permission, but it was both your father's and my wish. Please don't be angry. Life has its ups and downs. Even when things get tough, we want you to persevere and live your life fully. So stay strong and find your happiness." The letter ended there. Tears streamed down my face, wetting the paper. My aunt, standing next to me, pressed her eyes and shed tears alongside me. "My sister truly cared about you in her heart. You were a treasure," my aunt said gently, holding my hand. From the envelope, a bank book in my name emerged. It seemed like something my mother must have secretly made in the past. To my surprise, when I opened the bank book, a substantial amount was recorded. I felt that this was probably the inheritance from my father that my mother had saved for me. A few days later, my brother and his wife showed up at the house. Without even knocking on the door, they entered as if it was their own home. "It's time for you to leave, just as promised, right?" my brother sarcastically said. As I stood still, my sister-in-law became irritated. "Isn't it your duty to leave quickly?" she said, almost as a command. For a moment I felt overwhelmed by the atmosphere, but I took a deep breath, looked them straight in the eyes, and said calmly, "Actually, this house is now under my name." With that statement, the room's atmosphere became tense. My brother and his wife looked at each other, exclaiming, "What? What kind of joke is this? I am the eldest son. I should inherit the house, right?" my brother said, clearly shaken. Beside him, my sister-in-law stared at me. "This is the first I've heard of this," she added perplexedly. However, I had decided to state the facts. "The house and the inheritance are all managed under my name, so there's nothing to divide." My brother frowned. "Then hand over half of that inheritance to us," he demanded. "But this money was left for my future, and to ensure that I take care of the house. You always looked down on me, and now you're asking for money." "What changed?" I questioned. His face turned red. Surprisingly, my sister-in-law exclaimed, "Wait, what is this? This isn't what we were expecting." From what I gathered, my brother recently faced significant trouble at his job and was subsequently fired. Not only that, but he and his wife were moving from one day job to another, seemingly in a tight spot financially. They probably had high hopes for my mother's inheritance and the house, but with my revelation, their expectations were shattered, and they began bickering, placing blame on one another. Watching their childish dispute, I thought, what can possibly be gained from all this? To them, I said calmly, "This is my house now. If you make any unnecessary fuss, I'll call the police." Trembling with anger, they reluctantly accepted my words and left. Since then, I've had no contact with them. I deliberately deleted all their contact details and began a new life in this apartment. This apartment is my treasure, filled with memories of my father and mother. Now, I have a loving partner by my side. We plan to build a new family in this apartment. He respects my decision and proposed that we take the first step of our new life here. Our future is bright, and I want to pass on the warm love my parents gave me to the children we will have in the future.